Well, hello and welcome. I am super excited you are all joining today to listen in. I have a fantastic guest for you, somebody who kind of crossed his paths with me in another industry a long time ago in the financial space. And I'm glad to welcome Chuck Garcia. He is an author, he's a speaker, he's a leadership coach. I mean, the titles go on, and I'm really grateful you're here, especially in this timing right now in our world and economy and the job place to really talk about leadership. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Angie. It's a pleasure to be here. Indeed. In fact, I think if we mark any time in history, we always say, oh, this is a really good time. But I have to say, this is a really good time to talk about these topics.
It really, really is. And I know we had a brief conversation before we jumped in here, and I can't wait to talk about really the shift that we're seeing. And as far as leadership is concerned, we have similar histories as far as the financial space. And I have to go back to, say, 1997, when I started my journey into the financial investment world at Morgan Stanley. There was no leadership. It was management. We made it up.
Right.
It was a much different game back then.
Yeah, they didn't call it that. And I remember I was at Bloomberg in the entire decade of the 90s, and I had the good fortune of being led by this amazing man. And I learned more from him, not about management. Mike Bloomberg did not manage us, but without a doubt, he led us. And he led us first with the mindset of great expectations. And we never forgot, and I carried with something my father told me when I was a little kid. To those who are given much, and he paused for dramatic effect, much is expected. And he didn't mean it in any way other than if you are blessed enough to be giving something. He really meant it as a matter of reciprocity. You give it back, and then you give more. And if you give 10, 15% more of what you're giving, this is how to make the world a better place. And I learned that just in that little snippet from my dad. And even though I studied management in college like we all did, when I was under the gravity of Mike, he had a style I never read about in a textbook. No professor ever talked about it. He led with this inspiration of expectations, and he gave us all of the tools, no matter what it was, to be able to meet or hopefully exceed them. It was such a simple model. They didn't look over our shoulder. It wasn't anything like that. It was, here you are. What are you going to do with this? And if you need my help, you let me know. Otherwise, you figure it out. And we had the freedom to determine how we were going to do it. That was great leadership to me. So I saw it firsthand because we had this amazing capacity to do things without a rule book, without a compliance manual.
Yeah.
It was go out into the world and take it. Oh, and if you need my help, call me. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you're good. What a simple model, but it was incredibly effective.
Yeah, that's what we know leadership as today, right? Like we're very aware of all of those things, the empowerment, the space, the freedom, the support. But really back then, that was a rarity, wouldn't you say?
It was. In fact, I think when we compared as get together with your friends from college or wherever, and you start to recount, hey, how's it going? Got a good boss, bad boss? What are the people like? Did you get married? Do you have children? You start to recount the milestones. But ultimately, without question, you talk a lot about your work because you spend so much time doing it, it matters. And that was at a time, at least in my life, I had recently gotten married, thinking about a family. There were the other dimensions, trying to figure out that work-life balance. Is my wife okay? And if we have kids, do we stay in the city? All the things we go through. But ultimately, when you got to the talk back in the late 90s about your corporate culture, what was it like to come to work in that space? And you compared notes. I have to say, in my experience, I served Morgan Stanley, but I never worked there. The narratives of how we spent our day and how we thought about going to work, markedly different.
Sure.
You could tell who loved going to work. You could tell who hated going to work. It was so clear in the first few seconds.
For sure. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that time frame was really this pivotal point too, where we were coming out of the generation before us that was really like you just showed up for work, you did what you had to do. You didn't have to necessarily like it. You just, clocked in, clocked out, and you did your job. And that really started to evolve, I think, probably in tandem with great leadership. But for you, you started, so that was at Bloomberg.
Yeah.
And
years.
Yeah, what was that position you were holding at that time?
Well, I had two. The first, I'm bilingual. My parents are Brazilian. So my first 7 years at Bloomberg, I was head of Latin American sales. I spent my entire existence south of the border, selling Bloomberg terminals into Buenos Aires, Santiago, Chile, Sao Paulo, Brazil, all those places. However, through a simple twist of fate and maybe a little bit of luck, I became the company's public spokesman. So it was 1997, I guess, when you were emerging into Morgan Stanley, you would likely have seen me on a stage somewhere in the world. And I was flying all around. Mike had now become the icon. He was a multi-billionaire by then. Bloomberg had taken its place. It was ubiquitous between the investment managers, the investment banks, corporations. Everybody was adopting Bloomberg. My job was to go out into the world, and it was about branding. Mike was very conscious. When he started the organization, he talked about the Disney three pillars: recruiting, branding, and training. Train the clients, train ourselves. But I was part of the branding. The job, we didn't have titles there, but let's call it head of global marketing. But not marketing in the sense of I was trying to figure out what's the user experience. There were other people to do that. To me, Bloomberg was always in demand as an organization to show up to all these conferences, to show up client conferences, and it was me.
Yeah.
So I flew all over the world, wherever Bloomberg terminals were, and they were everywhere, stepping on stages in all of these industry conferences, becoming the mouthpiece for this organization. I didn't know it then, but at the time, it was giving birth to what it is I do now, where I spend plenty of time on stage and coaching leadership. But I was so proud, Angie, to be in that position. For one, it was made up for me. I never considered I would do it, but I just had a knack for it. Before I knew it, it became a full-time job. But I state that because when you're speaking about an organization, you can't fake that. It has to be authentic.
Sure.
And I described, I was learning from Mike, culture, leadership, collaboration, becoming emotionally intelligent, everything now that is in my life now. I apply the rules of what I learned back then because it was so different. It was innovative. It wasn't just the innovative machine. It was the innovation of how we treat each other. That then became the basis of what became my second career.
So I hear so much inspiration that really led you to that.
Indeed. Well, when you are around inspiring people, you can't help but try to do the same with the people that are around you. And I learned from Mike, it was a contagion. And also another contagion. If you're miserable, that's an even worse contagion.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like that. It was very much, oh my God, look how privileged, look how lucky we are to be on the precipice of this different kind of leadership, of this organization that was just succeeding beyond its wildest imagination. That's a gift.
Yeah.
You can't take that kind of gift for granted. At least I never did, because I was so fortunate to be there.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up two questions. One, I kind of have to pause and ask this question because I know so many of the listeners, and they ask me this all the time. Like you said, you can't help but be inspirational and be inspired when you're around people like that. Absolutely. But not everybody is that fortunate and blessed to be around people like that. And I think there's a leadership component in there. So what do people do when the people they are around don't tend to be that stand-up, inspiring leadership type of person?
Yeah, unfortunately, people are going to be looking for that even though they don't get it at work. So there's two ways of looking at that. One is you put up with it as much as you hate doing it, and you find inspiration in your non-work activities. Okay, it's not ideal, but it is one way. If you are in a position and you feel that you don't want to leave it for whatever reason, even though you may not be happy and you're not surrounded by the inspiration, somehow people do it all the time. And I see it. Here's the other part, though. And I think we have a certain freedom. Unless you are in a contracted employee consideration, you can always leave it. And it's a hard thing to do. People are very comfortable, even comfortable in their misery, because it's the misery they know.
Sure.
And they're comfortable being in it, and they don't want to provoke that comfort, as bad as it is. But I think what we find, and the reason people change so often, is because they begin to think differently about what they want out of the work. So in many cases, coming out of college, we all did. We didn't have much money. We got a crummy little apartment in the city or somewhere close. We go to work. We do the best we can to make more money to get a better apartment, and then the cycle begins. But I think something happens when you begin to get to a certain point in your career. The mindset shifts as to the expectations of what I want out of that.
Yeah.
And when you're 22, people say, Goldman Sachs, good company, this bad company, whatever that is. And you don't know what that means, but you just follow that. At some point, everyone gets to decide, what does that mean to me? And not only what do I want to do at work, even more important, not even why. I think the what and the why are not as important as the who. And I think there's a book out there called Who, Not Why. Because all people, what's your why? I don't give a damn what your why is if your who is bad.
Right.
And that's the who, Angie. Who are you going to spend your time with? I think people are too, this is my own humble opinion, they're too obsessed. I want to be in that product. I want to build that thing. Well, to me, I look at it differently. I don't think that product or that thing matters nearly as much as who you're doing it with. Because the joy doesn't come from building the widget.
Sure.
The joy comes from who you built that widget with.
Wow.
Every night, I used to walk down Park Avenue on my way to Grand Central, and I would recount my day. And I purposely walked. It was a long walk from the Bloomberg office or the BlackRock office, but every night I reflected, damn, I'm a lucky guy. I work with incredibly smart people. They were kind and generous. Any conflict, we worked it out. Any disagreements, we were respectful. I never recounted what did I build or what did I sell. Instead, I reflected on how fortunate I was to be in that meeting with that guy or that woman that made me feel, God, we're doing good work. And I wish someone had told me that. They didn't.
Yeah.
We crammed, we examined, we regurgitated, and, go to Goldman or go to Morgan Stanley. Okay, why?
Right.
Well, it depends on the who. And if you get the who right, doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of talk around the who. There really wasn't. It was all very self-focused on what you could do, and it didn't matter so much about those that are around you. And it's so true. I mean, I love what you said. We don't, the joy isn't in building the widget. It's around the people that you're with. And it sounds like you had that environment. So even though you had this environment and you obviously were around inspirational people, what did you see as far as the opportunity for you that was so compelling? Go, this is my direction.
Yeah. Well, it was funny that what I ultimately came to do, the job that I described as public spokesman, did not just emerge out of thin air. And here's how it emerged, and it was interesting. I was responsible for a certain division of sales territory. In my case, it was Latin America at Bloomberg. There was someone else for California, someone for Canada, whatever that was. Just about every week, we, as the managers, were expected to step up in front of most of the company and simply provide updates. But how's it going? So in my case, we started Mexico, then we went to Argentina, then we went to Chile. But Angie, what I saw some pretty successful people running their operating divisions and doing them well. And they got up in front of the crowd and they couldn't wait to sit down. They rushed through it. It was boring. It was lifeless. It was tactically proficient. Didn't take me to any place that I would have wanted to have gone. And as I watched them, and many of them were my friends, so no offense to them, their bar was incredibly low. I didn't see that request as a burden. I saw it as an opportunity. One, I got to do better than these guys. Because when I'm sitting there listening to them, I am incredibly bored here. There's got to be a better story.
Yeah.
And they weren't telling it. They were just doing facts and figures. It reminded me of school. I was just memorizing stuff and spitting them back to my professor. Nothing good about that, but that's what we did. So Angie, here's where it happened. When I started to get up, I said, the first thing I'm going to do is not that. I'm going to bring energy, and I learned this from Warren Buffett. Bring your energy. And if you bring that energy, if you bring that enthusiasm, the focus is now targeted not to the words you were singing, but the way that you were making them feel. And so when I got up there and I talked about it and I told stories, here we were in Santiago, Chile. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't understand the Chilean accent. I didn't know where I was going. We didn't have GPS. I'm in a crummy hotel. The food sucks. But, what are you going to do? You got to make the best of it. So as I started doing that, I wasn't leading with the facts and the figures. I was actually ending with them because people were hanging on. Oh, my God, that's a cool story. As people were then, week after week, people saying, Chuck, you got to get up there. We don't want to hear from these other guys. What else you got? So all of a sudden, Angie, what happened? People started to see me as this brand. Wow, this guy's really good at this. All I was trying to do was not be like the other guys. It wasn't that strategic. I wasn't so intentional. I was just trying to serve the audience in a way that brought enthusiasm, which was a heck of a lot better than the alternative. Yeah. Because of the visibility of that position, people now were asking me, hey, you did a nice job. Could you speak at this? Or we've got a guest coming in from another country. And I remember a bunch of Chinese ambassadors or something like that. Chuck, go talk to the Chinese. Then the Israeli guys came in. Chuck, could you talk to the Israelis? What do you want me to talk about? Anything you want. That became then my association with, wow, he's good at this. And it became a full-time job. So, and even though there wasn't a job description, I didn't apply for it. The opportunity presented itself. Mike was thinking about who am I going to put into that position. It was just the simplicity of wanting to do a better job that ultimately led me to this. And what I do for a living, I do this every day, all day. From that moment, that changed what I did.
You saw a gap. You saw that there was a better way. And I think that's so important in leadership because you can have great leadership skills as far as leading people, but you have to be able to speak and kind of command that audience and engagement in order to get people to actually listen, right? And follow some of that leadership.
Agreed. However, and here's the big but, most people in their careers, 90% of them play it safe. To them, the mark of success is the absence of mistakes. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And if you're going to operate on my kid, the doctor, I don't want to make mistakes. So I'm not diminishing the importance of technical competence. But what I am suggesting that if you look at it from another angle, stepping out of that comfort zone, I didn't know what my comfort zone was. I was just trying to do a good job of something that led me to another place. I didn't have any fear because I had nothing to lose. I wasn't held captive or inert by the fact that I'm not going to be perfect. I didn't give a damn what mistakes I made because I never believed people were going to remember my mistakes because I didn't care. What they remember was how I made them feel. And I made them feel like I care enough about you to prepare intently for what I'm about to say. And I want to bring you into my story because that's the only way that I can feel that you're going to get some value out of me. When I train people, though, Angie, what I came to learn and what gave birth to my second book. So my first book, A Climb to the Top, was teaching people to communicate, very mechanical and tactical. But what I learned is in order for me to be a better teacher, how do I help people remove their fears? It's that simple. If 90% of the people are in fear of making a mistake, they're not going to learn to communicate any better because they're always going to be on the lane that just keeps tactically proficient. Okay, I get that. Tactical proficiency is not an accelerator for career flying, but it's good. But I think we, each of us, get to decide what capacity are we willing to test in order to see what is our true potential. And I think most people are trapped by that anxiety, so they never read.
Yeah, and you said, a lot of people, they play it safe. So if the listeners, if our leaders out there are saying, yes, that is me, I tend to play it safe, how do they, kind of push it a little bit and get out of that comfort zone to step up a little bit more?
Yeah, well, it's one thing to say, hey, get comfortable in the discomfort, but that's a fair attitude. What I can say, though, and I think most people, I hope I could help them to change their mindset, that try a few tactics at a time. If you play it safe, most people who play it safe tend to lean on bad habits. but things that they lean on that are bad habits that they're not aware of. So I recommend to everybody, and they don't necessarily need a communications coach like me to do it. I ask everyone, no matter who they are, put yourself on a recording. Try to see yourself dispassionately and watch it. Be mindful of how you show up, of how you speak. Is there enthusiasm? Are you speaking and it's like, forget about it, and these filler words. Many people do. Look at the way that you address that camera and ask yourself, if you fired yourself and then came back the next day back into the same position, what are the adjustments that you would make to work yourself back into it? And when people begin to see, and I say this because most people only change when something they threaten is under siege. So imagine if your job is under siege, okay, what are you going to do to self-correct? If you don't hire me or many of my friends who coach, and you were to coach yourself, what would you do? That's a hard thing for people to do, but if you really want that moment to figure out how to change this, you're going to have to get uncomfortable. Otherwise, if all you're looking for is comfort, you're not going to change one iota. Don't complain to people. Don't choke on the regret. Just accept it. And that's okay. There's no judgment. You just have to decide how much capacity are you willing to test? How much of the mistakes are you willing to tolerate, and some potential embarrassment? And that's okay. And that's why I wrote A Climb to the Top. It was a toolkit to help people understand, how do I communicate with others? They didn't teach that in school.
Gosh, I wish we were taught more of these skills. I wish the kids were taught more of these in school, because they go such a long way in communicating and leading, and so much more than some of our, core subjects. But you, I think, hit the nail on the head when you said, you didn't care about what people thought. And that is so challenging for people. I mean, one of the biggest things I see, and I'm sure you see too as a coach, is people are so in their head about what someone's going to think of me. What is their opinion, or, their judgment? What do you say to somebody who is kind of stuck in that fear of what other people will think about them?
Well, I have the good fortune now that I can point them to what is, to me, the greatest, next to Seinfeld, the greatest television show in the history of television. And that's Ted Lasso. Anyone watched it?
Love it.
Oh, my goodness. I've never seen a show like this, because the character of Ted Lasso is the most emotionally intense leader I've ever known. And when he was put into the situation and the circumstances of this show, at first you think, okay, this is ridiculous. But when you peel back the layers and you watch that behavior, he has no fear. He's gone in completely, he was there under a roost. But I think I draw inspiration, Angie, from that, because he is in a situation that he didn't control, that seems so hopeless, and he uses the power of his emotional intelligence to move people to his cause. Whether he wins or loses, he never talks about wins and losses. He talks about, we're going to play the game, we're going to do this. But I think to most people, look at Ted Lasso, a guy who had nothing to lose, never afraid to make a mistake. And what I love about this character, always asking the other coaches and the players, what did I learn from this? What did we learn from this? How do we hope to do better next time? And what did we learn from that mistake? Most people, Angie, when they have mistakes or those embarrassing moments, they want to run 180 degrees.
So true.
Direction. Don't do it. Confront your fears.
You're really right about wanting to run from the direction. People have that embarrassment and they're like, I don't even want to face it. But there is so much to learn there. And I love that you bring up Ted Lasso. I mean, I'm like, this show is amazing. I mean, it's just...
It is amazing. And I have to say, when I first watched it, I didn't have any expectations. People said, hey, Chuck, you should watch this guy. You're going to learn a lot from him. Oh, my God. I am amazed. But there's a quote here. It was one particular scene in a bar early on in the show where Ted Lasso, over the course of 5 minutes, it really came down to Walt Whitman, quote, be curious, judgmental. And what Ted Lasso was talking about, we all show up with our judgments. Could it do this, do that, do the other thing? But what I love about the character, be curious about the world, that's your social awareness. Be curious about your development. That's the self-awareness. That's the high emotional intelligence. Angie, stopped judging people 100 million years ago, and I don't give a damn how somebody judges.
Yeah.
I don't care. I just set out to put good work in the world, contribute to the people who need my help. Whatever the outcome, and I'm stoic in my approach, outcome be damned. I can't control it. What I can control is me, my behavior, what I say, my choices. That's it. Everything else, I believe to the world. And I hope I can inspire people to do the same. The more you are trapped in social judgment, what others think about you, the more you will inhibit your choices. And I think ultimately...
So true. I talk to people all the time about controlling our controllables. Make that list. What can't you control? What can you control? Because focusing on the things that you can't, I mean, that's just a dark rabbit hole there, that you want to go down. But, in Ted Lasso, in your analogy there, it's like the unattachment, right? Don't be attached to the outcome. Be willing to learn, let go of the ego. So many great pieces in there. And I love that you bring, see, it's
easy to say, but it's rigor and it's discipline and it's work. It doesn't just come in a flash of an epiphany. Oh my God, my come to Jesus moment.
No, not at all. It really doesn't. And you bring up the emotional intelligence with it, which I think is super important, because I was telling you earlier, I just came across this article today about leadership and how we're really pivoting from this IQ standard to really this EQ. Because of all that's going on in our world, layoffs, the economy, shifts, they're saying leaders have to have more empathy. It's less intelligence now, more empathy. What are your thoughts on that?
My job, I was hired by the CEO who had announced to the public that he was going to resign at a year and a half. There were 6 C-level people below him. Each one of them was a candidate in the succession plan to become the CEO. When he hired me, he said, what I'd like you to do not have an investment in the outcome, but I would like you to train the leaders on leadership communication and on emotional intelligence. Okay. So I wanted to involve the rest of the company, at least to have some input, them knowing this was a very public event. Your CEO is leaving. We are going to appoint a new one. I work with the board. I work with the CEO. But here's the most interesting part, Angie. We put together a survey to the 1,500 employees, and we asked them, if you could add input into the qualities of the next CEO of your organization, what would it be? And on the first round, we got 34 different, we cataloged it, we got 34 different responses. We want him or her to be this, that, the other. We whittled it down to 3. And it was amazing through the continual filtering of this survey. What do you want in your leader? So let me bring you back then. This was 2019. This was pre-COVID. Here's what it came up with. First, let me state what was on the list. An Ivy League pedigree, a GPA, your IQ. To the contrary, 3 things, and I want our listeners to heed this advice because it was unexpected. The number one thing we want out of our next CEO, it was 3 words: grace, honor, fire. What they were talking about, somebody who would stay calm under the weight of great expectations. The second, another 3 words: resolves conflicts effectively. Because when you're the CEO, you spend a lot of time in conflict resolution with your own team, strategic disagreements. Here was number 3, Angie, and this was the icing on the cake. Empathetic leadership style. Now they were talking stylistically. We do not want a command-control leader. We don't want someone who is fully collaborative and connected. That's very goofy. They even talked about that. We're not a Silicon Valley company. We like collaboration. We appreciate that. We want our CEO to be in the middle of the continuum, someone who is commanding in their way, empathetic in their manner, a little bit of both. This is an interesting equilibrium between the two. He, she must be decisive, be held accountable, but be very empathetic in that I feel your pain. I know how hard you're working. This is what the world is shifting to because this is what the generation coming up, what they want to follow. They don't want to follow because they have to comply, do what this leader tells you. They want to be in a position of agency where I want to choose to follow the person who leads by example, is calm under the weight of expectations, is very good at communicating, is very empathetic in their way. I appreciate not everybody's in line for this succession plan, but every year I looked at the LinkedIn lists, 2 lists. Number one, the LinkedIn top 10 hard skill lists that are most in demand by employees. Blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, what you'd expect. The 2022, I don't think it's been refreshed this year. The top 5 soft skills that appear on more ads in LinkedIn for recruiting than any other words. Everyone, if you got a pen, write this down because this becomes the barometer for your professional development. Number 1, creativity. Number 2, persuasion. Number 3, collaboration. Number 4, adaptability. And Angie, look what finally made number 5.
Wow.
Emotional intelligence. Bingo. Thank God, praise the Lord. It has made its way. But I think to your point, it's simply reflective of the changing expectations of people we want to choose to follow. What do they do well? And if anyone has the capacity for professional development choices,
I love it. I mean, it's exciting to think about where this is going to lead things. And the first thing that comes to my mind, though, is I work with a lot of business owners, a lot of people who've started their business on their own, hands in everything. Sometimes those business leaders, the majority of time, it's skills that are completely opposite of that created their success. So they're often sitting in my office going, why don't they just do what they need to do? Why, there's this lack of empathy and it's gotten to where they are, right? But how do we start to get those people to shift and lean into empathy?
Yeah, what you're describing is the great coach Marshall Goldsmith wrote a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. It's a Bible of mine. Marshall, if you're here out there listening to this, you're probably, I don't know that you are, but thank you for everything that you have taught. What he talked about is the paradox of success, that those that get promoted, and this is my work, I work with people promoted on the strength of their technical competence. Well done. But look what happens halfway up the mountain. The job description that you are now expected to work is radically different. You're not expected to do coding. You used to do coding. Now you got to lead people. You're not going to lead them by being a better coder. You're going to lead them by being a better leader. So what I think it's incumbent on everyone to recognize, if you aspire to leadership positions, just working on being a 1% better coder is admirable, but does not serve what's going to happen when your job description changes. So what do? If you aspire to those positions, think about what I said in the succession plan: grace under fire, conflict resolution, empathetic leadership style, or go to the LinkedIn. Begin to change the way that you're developed, because you get promoted into that position. I am often hired to fix those disasters. These guys watched a movie, they start to behave like the character that they saw, and everybody hates them and wants them fired. Wow, it's like that all the time. So take control of your career. Focus on the leadership, communication, emotional intelligence. These, to me, are the cornerstones. Don't try to do too much. Get better at communicating. Why I wrote A Climb to the Top. Get better at emotional intelligence. There's no lack of books out there or assessments you could take to measure your. And look at the equilibrium between being an external communicator, inspiring, provoking, and persuading people, and then being internally still in touch with yourself, because that's the only way that you're going to lead others, if you know how to lead yourself. Because if you don't, they're going to see.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. As I look at and I didn't know this until we talked today about your new book coming out, because A Climb to the Top is fantastic. I just read it recently, and I mean, amazing, just easily kind of executable pieces around leading, around speaking, around articulating. So definitely highly recommend that to the people that are trying to get out of that comfort zone, be a little bit more fearless, right? Be able to engage an audience like that. But I'm even more excited about your second book, The Moment That Will Define Your Life, because as we are moving into this space of emotional intelligence and leading differently, which I think ultimately is going to create so much more potential in the people that we lead, people need that guide. So,
In fact, I think the germ of the book was the climb to the top was meant to be tactical, to help you face your fears and to become a better communicator. But as I thought about how I became a better teacher, and I think I'd like to think I'm a better human being, and God knows I work on it, I thought about what would be the emotional companion to a climb to the top. I don't need to write a climb to the top too. It's already been. But when I talk about how do we get in touch with our inner selves to help us not just become better leaders, become better husbands, wives, parents to our children, how can we be better? I really talk about the combination of emotional intelligence and stoicism. Using both. Stoicism not as an unfeeling, to the contrary. It's knowing how to be in touch with your Take a deep breath. Think about where this is coming from. This place of authenticity. Don't worry about the mistakes. Just try as best you can to recognize we're all humans. Screw up. We make mistakes. Forgive others. Forgive yourself. Start with that. Forgive yourself for the mistakes and all the other bad stuff that has happened in your life. Start with clarity of mind. Think about who you are, what you want out of your life. It's not going to happen by accident. You teach it from coaching.
that is the wisdom that we were looking for from you today. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chuck. I am very excited about your book coming out. I like to always ask my guests a question. You shared so much of your own wisdom, but give us one piece of wisdom that somebody has shared with you along your path and your journey that has always stood out to you as like, that is one of the best pieces of wisdom I've ever received.
I think I got this, and I have to give Bloomberg credit for this. When I thought about my own educational model, I thought about all the things I got wrong. And if I got a 92 on an exam, congratulations, I got an A, and everybody's high-fiving. Well, Mike taught us very early on in our career is there's no failure, Chuck. He said that. There's only feedback. Every piece of information that comes at you is meant for the purpose of turning into something productive. And I say that because what I find is when people get things wrong, or when people screw up, they become they beat themselves up. To Mike's point is every moment that you're spending beating yourself up is another moment you're not advancing on. So I never forgot that. No failure, only feedback. Failure is just a human construct. Feedback is a very real thing. So if you screw up and you fail, what are you going to do? Come back another day. No failure, only feedback. Everything is feedback all the time. Everything is your teacher, and we are each other's teachers. And if you have the mindset of opening up that brain of ours to recognize everything is a learning moment, not to be destructive, but meant to be constructive.
I love it. Another great piece of wisdom. Thank you. So, Chuck, for everyone that is listening and they're going, gosh, this guy has so many great, pieces of information. They want to make sure they get your book. Where's the best place for them to follow along for you?
You bet. Well, the best thing you can always, if you remember my name is Chuck Garcia. Add a .com to it. You got me. It's chuckgarcia.com. For social media, I'm active on LinkedIn. You can just type in Chuck Garcia, and you'll see me. And if you recognize my picture or hear my voice, you'll see how I'm LinkedIn. You can always go there. And then you can go to Instagram. I'm there a couple times a week. It's called The Climb to the Top, which is the name of my book. But I recommend, if you want to get in touch with me, hit me on my website. There's a contact tab, or go to LinkedIn, which many people find me.
Love it. Thank you again for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And look forward to, we'll get you back on when that book comes out so that we can talk more about that emotional intelligence.